German submarine U-864 sank to the bottom of the North Sea in February 1945. Salvage divers located the wreckage 2 miles off the coast of Fege, Norway, at a depth of 490 feet. They expected to find steel rust and standard naval weaponry. Instead, they uncovered 67 tons of liquid mercury sealed inside 1,857 steel flasks. Hit subscribe now, you will want to see where this leads. The toxic cargo sat unexploded next to 2 torpedoes for 58 years. The North Sea hides secrets. Most people believe World War II ended entirely in a Berlin bunker. History books teach that the German surrender was clean. Documented naval records show a different reality. In late 1944, Nazi Germany initiated a covert resupply mission named Operation Caesar. The German command realized their borders were collapsing. They turned to their last remaining ally across the Pacific Ocean. Imperial Japan needed advanced technology to sustain its defense. Germany possessed the raw materials and the blueprints. They chose a highly specialized vessel for the transit. Submarine U-864 was an ocean-going Type IXD-2 cargo carrier. It measured 287 feet in length. It was built specifically for long-range, covert transport. This was not a standard patrol vessel. It was a steel warehouse designed to dive deep and avoid Allied radar networks. Dr. Innes McCartney, a leading marine archaeologist at the University of Bournemouth who spent 25 years studying sunken combat vessels, concluded that Germany used these ultra-long-range submarines as a final, desperate economic lifeline. The cargo was not meant for European battlefields. It was meant to prolong a global conflict. This is not fringe history. This is 81 years of unbroken documented record. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted the wireless signals detailing the mission. They knew the departure date. They knew the route. They knew the precise contents of the storage hull. Yet, the official public manifests for decades listed only standard machinery parts. The true nature of the cargo remained classified. The public assumed the sub carried basic supplies. The reality was far more dangerous. The Allied forces dispatched the British submarine HMS Venturer to hunt the vessel down. On February 9, 1945, the two submarines engaged in a deadly underwater duel. It remains the only time in naval history that one submerged submarine intentionally sank another submerged submarine. U-864 was split into 2 large sections. It dropped instantly to the seabed. The steel hull cracked upon impact. The ocean covered the site. For 58 years, the physical evidence of Operation Caesar remained undisturbed under the waves. The world forgot about the vessel. The families of the 73 crew members never received a full explanation of the cargo their relatives carried. The secret stayed beneath 490 feet of saltwater. The German military risked 73 elite sailors to transport an industrial chemical across the planet during a losing war. Your history classes never mentioned this specific operation. Drop one word in the comments. Did you know Nazi Germany sent stealth cargo submarines to Japan? I read every comment. And this one is going to split the room. Norway. March 2003. A salvage vessel floats above the coordinates of the lost German hull. Divers lower a remote-operated vehicle into the black water. The camera light cuts through the dark North Sea. The ocean floor is cold. The pressure at 490 feet is immense. Suddenly, a massive shape appears on the monitor. The hull of U-864 rests in 2 distinct pieces on the seabed. The bow stands upright in the mud. The stern lies 120 feet away. A robotic arm reaches toward the metallic wreckage. It taps against the rusted steel plate. The sound is a dull, heavy thud. Metal scraping metal. The divers see hundreds of rotting wooden crates scattered around the debris field. The wood breaks apart under the water pressure. Inside the crates are metallic canisters. They are heavy steel flasks. The surface of the containers is black with sludge. Each flask weighs about 100 pounds. They are arranged in rows inside the keel of the submarine. This is exactly where the German engineers welded them into the lowest part of the ship. The recovery team observes the condition of the metal. Time has not been kind to the steel. The salt water has eaten away at the protective layers. The divers notice a silver sheen in the silt. It does not look like ocean sand. It looks like liquid metal. The salvage crew works in absolute silence. They realize they are not looking at a standard military grave. They are looking at an underwater ticking clock. One wrong movement could rupture the fragile containers completely. The team retrieves a single container for analysis. The crane pulls the heavy object onto the deck of the salvage ship. The air smells of salt and old oil. Technicians wear protective suits as they approach the artifact. They scrape away the thick sea growth. They find a series of stamped numbers on the iron cap. The markings match the secret cargo manifests intercepted in 1945. The documentation is completely accurate. The ship was a floating chemical hazard. The 73 men on board slept directly above a mountain of poison. They lived their final days entirely unaware of the environmental disaster they were steering through the dark water. The salvage team realizes the scope of their discovery. The historical accounts of the sinking were correct. But the physical reality on the seabed is much worse than the archival files suggested. The metal is actively decaying. The surrounding ecosystem is already showing signs of heavy contamination. The divers must step back. The salvage team unsealed the recovered steel flask. Inside, they found 99.9% pure liquid mercury. This was not a minor industrial shipment. It was an intentional, massive concentration of a deadly neurotoxin. The primary cargo manifest from February 1945 reveals the true scale. The total weight reached 67 tons. It was distributed across exactly 1,857 steel flasks. The German military had welded these containers directly into the keel sections to serve as stable ballast during the long journey. But that is not what stopped people cold. The recovery team found a hidden compartment near the command deck. Inside the flooded space sat sealed steel cylinders. These cylinders did not contain mercury. They contained aeronautical blueprints. Dr. Tor Bradegaard, a senior marine biologist at the University of Bergen who spent decades monitoring North Sea ecosystems, analyzed the site data. He concluded that the mercury was only one half of a highly coordinated technological transfer. The submarine was a floating kit to build advanced weapons systems in the Pacific. The cylinders held complete engineering schematics for the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter. They also held manufacturing designs for jet engines from Junkers and BMW. Germany was giving Japan its most guarded defensive technology. And then came the passage no one expected. The dive team uncovered several crates marked with industrial codes. Inside were components for guidance systems. These were the exact parts needed to build radar-guided anti-shipping missiles. The cargo was designed to dismantle the Allied naval blockade around Japan. Think about what that means. The German high command knew their own nation was falling. Yet, they sent their most advanced scientific achievements out into the deep ocean. They risked their last operational long-range submarine on a gamble to shift the balance of power on the other side of the planet. Before the next part, we must examine how close this plan came to succeeding, and what happened when the steel finally began to fail. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now. What comes in the next 2 minutes is the part most people never hear. You need to be here for this. The third finding is the one that changed everything. The salvage team conducted a sonar scan of the surrounding seabed. They discovered the mercury was leaking. The steel flasks were originally 5 mm thick. The salt water had reduced the metal thickness to less than 1 mm in several sections. The mercury was escaping into the North Sea mud at a rate of several kilograms per year. It was entering the food chain. The local fish population showed mercury levels significantly higher than safe human consumption limits. The wreckage was actively poisoning the fishing grounds of western Norway. The primary source documents from the German Naval Archive outlined the precise intent. A letter from the German Ministry of Armaments states, the industrial mercury must reach Kyoto without delay to ensure the acceleration of detonator production. The chemical was not just ballast. It was a primary ingredient for explosives. This finding mirrors our modern world with frightening precision. Today, we see nations stockpiling materials in secret locations. We see toxic waste abandoned in coastal waters. The wreckage of U-864 is a physical monument to a modern reality. It shows how decisions made in a closed military room 81 years ago can suddenly threaten the food supply of an innocent community today. The words of the 1945 Naval Dispatch read plainly, "The security of the cargo overrides all survival protocols of the crew." The institution valued the chemical substance over human life. The ship sank, but the hazard remained. The Norwegian Coastal Administration initiated a massive study to determine the next step. They faced a choice. They could attempt to raise the 1,857 decaying flasks from the mud. Or they could bury the entire submarine under a massive blanket of sand and rock to seal the poison forever. The data showed that lifting the hull could cause a catastrophic rupture. A sudden release of 67 tons of mercury would devastate the North Sea fishing industry instantly. The cost of the cleanup would reach hundreds of millions of dollars. The risk was unacceptably high. The investigators realized the true nature of Operation Caesar. It was an environmental time bomb set by a dying regime. The submarine was never meant to be found. It was meant to vanish into the deep ocean, carrying its toxic secret to a destination that no longer existed. The local population of Fedge lives with this reality every single day. They look out at the water and know that 67 tons of liquid poison sit just 2 miles from their shores. The past is not buried in history books. It is resting on the seafloor, slowly rusting through 5 millimeters of German steel. The 73 men inside that submarine had families. They had homes. They had a destination in mind when they cleared the port of Kiel. Instead, their lives ended in a sudden explosion of cold water. They became footnotes in a grand military strategy. You have felt this. Most people have felt this at least once. You have felt the weight of choices made by distant institutions. People in quiet rooms make decisions that shape your life. They never see your face. They never know your name. Yet, their choices settle over your world like dust. The sailors on U-864 were breathing air inside an iron tube. They ate meals. They wrote letters home. They did all of this while sitting directly on top of 1,857 flasks of neurotoxin. The institution told them they were heroes protecting a nation. The institution actually used them as a delivery mechanism for an industrial poison. The text of the logbook stopped at 11:15 a.m. Silence followed. Think about the men who copied those cargo manifests by hand. They stamped the iron caps. They tightened the bolts. They believed they were contributing to a glorious defense. They were wrong. They were simply building a graveyard that would leak into the sea for a century. The ocean hides the physical decay, but it does not stop it. The families of those sailors grew old without answers. The fishermen of Fedge cast their nets into waters that carry an invisible threat. The past does not stay behind us. It leaks into the present. Most people have felt the gap between the history they were handed and the history that actually exists under the surface. If this description is landing for you, you are not alone. And you are not wrong to look deeper into what stays hidden. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are with this. Governments hide realities for specific, logical reasons. The 58-year silence surrounding the cargo of U-864 was not an accident. It was a matter of institutional selection. 3 clear factors caused authorities to keep this wreckage out of the public eye. First, the strategic exclusion of the manifest was politically untenable for the Allied nations after 1945. British intelligence had fully decrypted the submarine's contents using the Enigma code system before the vessel even left port. If the Allies admitted they knew about the 67 tons of mercury, they would have to admit exactly how much they knew about other shipments that slipped through their blockade. They chose to protect their intelligence methods rather than warn coastal nations about potential underwater hazards. Second, the geopolitical landscape changed instantly after the German surrender. The Western powers were no longer focused on old Nazi cargo. They were focused on the Soviet Union. A major environmental hazard sitting in Norwegian waters was a distraction from the Cold War. Addressing the wreckage would require cooperating with international maritime bodies, which risked exposing naval patrol routes in the strategic North Sea. Third, the economic cost of admitting the problem was too high for any single institution to face. The shipping industry depends on safe, open channels. Acknowledging that a massive deposit of liquid mercury sat directly inside a primary fishing zone would have devastated local economies decades earlier. It was far easier for institutional leaders to leave the vessel listed as a standard wartime casualty. The artificial intelligence analyzing these maritime patterns has no institution to protect. It has no reputation to defend. It was asked a question about naval wreckage patterns. It surfaced the specific, documented reality that humans had spent decades choosing to ignore. The historical timeline confirms this institutional logic. In 1947, the British Admiralty filed the operational reports of HMS Venturer away into deep government archives. They marked the files with strict classification codes. They did not notify the Norwegian government about the specific toxicity of the ballast. The priority was the containment of military secrets, not the containment of chemical spills. You can understand the logic behind these decisions without agreeing with them. Every large organization values its own survival over individual clarity. The naval commands of 1945 made choices based on immediate military survival. The governments of the mid-century made choices based on regional stability. The result was a long silence that only broke when the steel physical structures on the ocean floor began to collapse on their own. The original cargo manifest of U-864 lists specific manufacturing codes alongside the 1,857 flasks of liquid mercury. One line states the materials exist to fuel weapons production far from home. It describes a system prioritizing industrial dominance over ecological safety. Does this sound like it was written 81 years ago? Or does it sound like something from this week? These words were copied by hand by clerks who had no concept of global supply chains. They had no knowledge of modern corporate shortcuts. Yet, the philosophy matches our current landscape. We see massive chemical conglomerates dumping industrial byproduct into rivers. We witness energy entities burying radioactive materials near active fault lines. The physical reality on the seabed mirrors our modern corporate world with total precision. The Norwegian government constructed a massive containment barrier over the wreckage site. They dropped 30,000 tons of specialized sand directly onto the fractured hull. They reinforced that barrier with 160,000 tons of heavy rock to stabilize the slipping underwater slope. This is the engineering equivalent of sweeping dirt under a rug. It represents the exact technique modern organizations use to address systemic errors. They do not remove the hazard. They build an expensive structure to hide it. They call it containment. They call it risk management. We live in an era of monetized security and heavily marketed solutions. Entities tell communities that the water is safe. They claim the safeguards are permanent. Meanwhile, the actual physical sensors at 490 feet show continuous, minute shifting in the seabed silt. The modern mirror is clear. The entities that create global hazards are rarely the ones that live with the consequences. The German command staff who authorized Operation Caesar died decades ago in dry, protected bunkers. The people currently paying for the monitoring equipment are the local citizens of Western Norway. The situation offers an alternative view. The ancient substance resting in the dark water is a warning. It shows that hidden choices eventually force their way to the surface. Steel decays. Rock shifts. Sand erodes under the pressure of deep ocean currents. The narrative does not have to end in absolute ruin. The discovery of the submarine forced international bodies to tighten maritime disposal laws. It led directly to stricter enforcement of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. The exposure of the secret prevented a much larger catastrophe from occurring in complete silence. The presence of the wreckage forces a rare moment of honesty. It proves that we cannot permanently bury the errors of our past. The ocean floor eventually speaks. The rock barrier serves as a physical reminder that vigilance is required. The true resolution is not finding a better way to hide the poison. It is choosing to stop manufacturing it. And that is where the story shifts. This video covered the hidden chemical cargo of U-864 and the institutional silence that kept it on the ocean floor for 58 years. But it raised a question that goes deeper. Who made the final decision to sink the vessel, and what secret did the British commander take to his grave? That is what the next video answers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The upcoming investigation exposes the unredacted combat logs from that afternoon in 1945, showing a tactical choice that changed the rules of naval warfare forever. You will not want to miss what comes next. The Norwegian government spent millions covering 67 tons of toxic mercury with 190,000 tons of sand and stone instead of bringing the ship to the surface. Drop your answer below. Was burying the submarine a genuine act of safety, or was it a cheap way to hide a historic military failure? I read every comment. This one is going to split the room. If this showed you something you have never heard before, a like helps this story reach the people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly into the secret records of HMS Venturer. We uncover the private letters of Lieutenant James Launders and the hidden coordinates he chose to leave completely out of the official report.